Hello everyone, welcome to Pragmatic Talks. I would like to introduce you all with the speaker Alex Travis. Alex is currently working as a product manager at Mozilla. He has 10 plus years of experience as a product manager and he has worked with various organizations like Social Labs, Viral Ninjas, and Lenovo before joining Mozilla. So today we are going to discuss the things around product manager and growth product manager. But before moving ahead, I would like you all to spend 5 minutes on the article I'm sharing with you. That's on Product Management 2.0, a growth strategy by Alex.
It's yeah. I was going to say that it's not necessary to read it. I'll cover a summary. If you would like to read it after, you may gain additional value out of the presentation. But I don't want people to have to sit around here for 5 minutes while others catch up.
Yes, so I would like to take you forward from here and we can continue.
Perfect. So yeah, I'll start this off. So today I'll be covering product management and growth product management. I don't know if you've ever noticed applying for jobs, there tends to often be product manager roles and growth product manager roles, and it's not always obvious what the differences are if you're new to the industry. So just before we jump into that, I'll talk a little bit about myself. Who am I? Ultimately, I spent probably the first 7 years of my career building a bunch of startups that ultimately failed. So you might not have heard of any of them, but I learned a lot from that experience. After that, I worked as a growth product manager, developing the referral programs for over 30 e-commerces, some of the largest in the world, and which eventually led me to run mobile growth, or lead mobile growth rather, at Firefox for a year. And since then, well, as a mobile growth product manager on Firefox, I'd identified that one of the large opportunities for driving mobile users was to help people move between their devices more seamlessly. So one of the big opportunities there was getting people to sync their devices, their desktop and their laptop. And so there was an opportunity to product manage the Firefox accounts and their sync team. And I took that opportunity, and the role has evolved a lot into a much larger team called Application Services that includes not just Firefox account and syncing, but some of the data storage in the browser, the cloud storage, data encryption, push services. So ultimately, I product manage a lot more today, and it's evolved. My role has evolved pretty far from growth, I think, and so it's allowed me to observe the differences between regular product management and growth product management, and hopefully I can share all that with you today. Just before I move on, please everyone make sure to mute. Sometimes I hear typing or cars passing by, so it's a little distracting. Thank you. So just as a quick recap, what is growth? Most growth teams are focused on, are cross-functional teams that are quite agile, that focus on pirate metrics, which is pirate metrics are focused on acquisition, activation, retention, referral, and revenue. Marketing might be a little bit heavier on the acquisition side, but normally growth teams will be focusing on either all of the four pirate metrics, or some teams could be just focused on one or the other. Like, for example, there are teams at Dropbox that focus purely on referral. The growth teams are always using the scientific method. They're making observations, doing research, formulating hypotheses, running tests and experiments, analyzing results, and With every experiment, the conclusions they take usually help formulate new hypotheses so that they can approach it through an iterative process. So what does a growth product manager do then within a growth team? And a lot of that is around prioritizing the experiments, using ICE or a RICE score. What the heck is an ICE or RICE score? So RICE score is reach, impact, your confidence, and the ease of any idea that you have. And so you can create a score out of that to determine when you should prioritize it. So an example is the reach. A new feature in settings might not reach very many people, but if they do use it, it might have a very large impact. And perhaps you have data from past experiments that give you a high confidence score, and it's medium difficulty or so medium ease to build. So as I mentioned, a lot of this is applying scientific method. So a growth product manager will be documenting the hypotheses and experiment details, and even identifying the key success metrics before running tests. And after tests are run, we'll be documenting the results and sharing them company-wide, or as wide as you have to, depending on the size of the company. And taking all these learnings, you create a playbook so that you have an asset from all your learnings. Because I don't like to consider a failed experiment a failure. I like to call it a save, because you've actually learned something and you've prevented yourself from deploying something bad into production or in front of your users. So how does this contrast to traditional product management, and what is widely understood about it? So product managers do idea management too, and they'll tend to have a backlog, but they'll write specifications. Often we call them product requirement documents, PRDs. There'll be road mapping. Road mapping can go anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. And prioritization comes into play, and there's big focus on delivery and capturing user feedback and doing analytics. But the experience I had throughout the beginning of my career with product management formulated a lot of biases towards that, because I felt that the growth process had a lot of benefits over more traditional product management. And so even 2 years ago, I wrote a provocative post. 13,000 people started reading it, 4,000 finished it, and I got countless people reaching out for me for jobs. The only problem is there were a lot of biases in my opinion, and not all of them are necessarily correct. Some of the things I touched in that article was that road mapping is a waste of time, mainly because it doesn't provide a lot of flexibility, and that changing it could potentially make you look bad if you're flip-flopping around, or you're pivoting. If you've communicated a roadmap to a wider audience, then you've kind of committed to it, and I really didn't like that feeling. And so also the product managers that I really worked with in the past didn't care about metrics enough, whereas growth product managers were obsessed with metrics. And no, that's not necessarily true, I've come to realize. I felt that many product managers prioritize almost everything based off of user feedback. To kind of quote Henry Ford, he said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have asked me for faster horses. They would not have made a car. So users don't always know exactly what they want. And that was one of the things also that annoyed me with product management. And when you document an A/B test as a growth product manager using the scientific method, they're usually maybe 2 pages long. And I was noticing that product managers were writing 20-page product requirement documents, and often filled with assumptions. And so these were things that really annoyed me with traditional product management. But like, I was wrong, or rather, it's more complicated than that. I think that they both have strengths and weaknesses, and there are times in which you should use one approach or the other. And so this is what I'm gonna cover moving forward. So, I believe I might have. 1 second. Here we go. So there are shortfalls to the growth process itself. I believe that there's insufficient consideration for product and business strategy. Anybody who's studied business will have covered Michael Porter at school, and you know, it's not just leadership that should be thinking about that, but a product manager should be thinking about that. How does your product position itself in the market? How does it compare to your competitors? What is your differentiation? Are you going to compete on price or on functionality? You know, a growth product manager doesn't think about that as much, but a traditional product manager will, or rather should. It also, the growth process doesn't necessarily work for larger projects. Usually as an example, re-architecting, for example, servers or data storage or a product rewrite. Those are big endeavors, and you know, usually growth process and growth product management focuses on specific themes for 2-3 months in order to really move metrics. And so it has shortcomings there too. So, and I've come to realize over time that not every feature improvement that you're shipping can easily be measured. And an example of this would be security. If you, for example, I'm product managing Firefox accounts. If I want to make an improvement to a login flow, I can easily measure that. However, making security improvements or adding, say, 2-factor authentication is not something that's always easily measurable. It's preventative, and sometimes you should just do it, because you don't want it to be like at a construction site where, you know, your only success metric is no incidents in the last 90 days. You want to make sure that there are never any incidents. You don't want to compromise security and your users' data. And so finally, like the growth process often lacks that roadmap. That roadmap that I hated turns out to be makes it really difficult to communicate and align with other teams. So if you are isolated and you're a small product team that doesn't need to worry about other product organizations within a company, then perhaps the roadmap is a little less important. A backlog could be sufficient. But the moment that you need to get alignment, coordinate different teams, the roadmap really does actually help to create alignment and to give deadlines and focus to everybody. You know what everyone, so that everyone is aware of what they're working towards. So it's really not black or white. It's actually pretty gray. And so kind of go back on this. Road mapping is not a waste of time. It can help for larger companies. And especially for achieving ambitious goals. PMs, I was saying that PMs don't care about metrics. That's quite false. I think that bad PMs don't care about metrics, but good product managers really do. And so I feel like there might have been a culture shift over the last few years, and some haven't adopted it yet, but data should be in every product manager's toolbox, and not just growth product managers. You know, same thing, I was observing that product managers were very, very focused around just like the user's opinion. But a good product manager not only considers that, they consider engineering priorities, company strategy and product strategy, metrics, and the overall environment. If your competitor makes a massive change, it doesn't matter what your users are saying, it could really impact your priorities. So there are additional observations I made over time. And sometimes, that product managers always think they know exactly what they want to make in a 20-page PRD. I think that I've seen, and I think I've even found myself writing 20-page product requirement documents lately. And the truth is, if the project is really complicated and there's a lot to be done, and some things can take a year or two to build, then yeah, you should really be documenting everything. Everything you collected, everything you know, to give the team the right direction. And by that, I mean, you're going to be doing research. If you have user research, you have metrics analysis, market research, competitor analysis, that should all be going in there. And anything that you're going to be spending a long period of time on should have that. So there is a place for these very long product requirement documents. Just not always. So it's, when I say it's not black or white, you can combine these skills. So for example, even when you're devising or planning a product strategy, you can run small experiments to validate whether the strategy makes sense. Just because you think that the strategy is going to differentiate you from your competitors doesn't mean it's the right one. And so you can use some of the tools from the Growth Product Manager's toolbox and run experiments to validate it before committing to it. Roadmaps are important, but as you especially work on large projects, you should be defining milestones that you can validate as you go along. You can experiment as you go along. They're not as simple as running regular A/B tests, but you shouldn't be working on anything for a year without showing continuous progress. And if you're a startup, building a new product comes out, it could take you a year to build your product, but investors are going to want to see at a regular cadence progress, metrics, validation. So again, there's a combination of the skills of both that are really useful to accomplish your job. So the key takeaways here are that I was reminded that growth teams are often separated from product management teams for these specific reasons. Their priorities are not the same place. So there's not one that's better than the other. They're quite complementary. Growth teams are focusing on metrics for a reason, because they don't have to focus as much on the strategy as a product manager would. They can really work and optimize those metrics and leave that responsibility to the responsibility of long-term planning to a product manager. And whereas the product manager himself won't have to focus too much on the fine-tuning and the optimization. If you're a product manager that is not necessarily working on large features in the long term, you can really still adopt the growth process. It can still be beneficial. And I think that's where the nature of the work is really going to come into play. With large projects, it's very difficult to purely adopt a growth process, the growth process of the growth product manager. But if you ship smaller features more iteratively, then the growth process could still work for you. And yeah, I think I already touched this, but large features, large enhancements don't work for an entire year. You can still learn from the growth process, even if you haven't adopted it. Validate as you go along. And my final takeaway for you is, even if it's not measurable, security should never be treated lightly, even if it's hard to measure. Something that I struggled with enormously coming from growth, because I think it always had a always looked like it had a small impact in my metrics, but ultimately that's, that's not the case. Reputation is important to protect. Users' data is important to protect. And it's surprising, if you want to think about metrics or find metrics, think of it as branding and image and reputation, but it has an important role. So that's it for now. Yeah, I'd like to turn it over to everyone, and I guess it's the AMA part. So the question is, what is a roadmap for a PM at Mozilla? I think that varies a lot between PMs and the type of work that a PM at Mozilla has to work on. So, and I'll give an example. I'll use myself as an example. When I first joined the sync and accounts team, the product was very mature, and there were a lot of, I really dived into metrics and realized a lot of optimization could be done. Funnel, not everyone had a successful login rate or a successful registration. And so we spent a lot of time optimizing that flow and trying to get users the best authentication experience. Nobody likes to create an account. Nobody likes to log into a website or a service. So in our case, we did actually use just a product backlog that was prioritized by impact. But today, we're working on a large re-architecture, which involves rewriting most of our integrations across all platforms into a single library written in Rust that can easily be used by countless products around the team, around the company. So this doesn't just include authentication; it includes data storage and syncing, which will potentially result in new servers. And so in this case, we really had to communicate widely this longer roadmap to the rest of the company to align with all the teams, make sure that other teams have can deploy these changes and these new libraries in their products. So I hope that kind of answers, and this is really where I give myself as an example here, because I don't want to speak for all the other product roadmaps and how other product managers at Mozilla and Firefox do it. But I think just within a few teams that I've worked with, you can see that over the course of the last few years, the road mapping has really changed. So question is how to prioritize a project phase-wise if the project cannot be rolled out phase-wise, as everything is interdependent and cannot be possible for multiple deliveries. So I think that planning becomes really important here. I would think that many of the engineers on my team did not believe that this entire re-architecture could be rolled out in multiple phases. But through planning, we realized that there were ways to do it. In fact, we spent the first 3 months building a proof of concepts and prototypes, even building a fake application that we could experiment with what we wanted to build and how we thought we were going to build it. This proved to our stakeholders, which in a startup case could be also their investors, that what we were planning to spend the next year or two on was worth investing in. Now, as we go along, we're focusing on different parts of the product and trying to get that into people's hands as quickly as possible. And for example, talking about data re-architecture, well, there are different data types in our case. And so we probably initially thought we had to do it all, but realized we could focus on different types of data and slowly move across that spectrum. I think it's super risky to go to build something for a year or two and not get validation throughout the way. I think that might require almost an extra month, if possible, of planning to see how you can break it down and how you can validate as you go along. But it's really something that should be figured out because it minimizes risk on the long term. Yeah, somebody was asking what we were writing things in, and yes, that was written in Rust. Rust is a language that was started by employees at Mozilla, and I think it's become one of the more quite popular language. If you look at Stack Overflow's recent survey about people's favorite languages, Rust, I think 3 years in a row, has been #1. And it contributed to the release of, or the improvements of Firefox Quantum. Last year, Firefox got a huge boost in performances, and there was certainly big re-architectures, but most of that was done in Rust because the language itself provides tremendous performance improvements. And so my teams hope to leverage that too. And at the same time, it will allow us to write our code once and have it work on desktop, iOS, and Android. So for a growth PM, for a very early stage venture, what should the success metrics look like? Experience or top line? So I think definitely at the early stages of a startup, you want to demonstrate, you want to collaborate with the product managers to demonstrate product market fit. So your attention and engagement rate will be important. Now, I don't want to tell you that, oh, people should be using your product every day. It'll also depend on the type of product that you have. If you have something like Airbnb, somebody will only use your product maybe once or twice a year. But I think that it's going to be very important in an early stage startup to show that you're creating value and people are willing to reuse your product. And if, depending on the business model, that you can either monetize it or through advertising or through some form of subscription. I know that Silicon Valley VCs care less at the early stages about monetization, but I've been burnt on startups. I think it's worth validating early on that you have a proper business model for monetizing. But obviously that really, before all of that, making sure you have a good product market fit and that you can retain your users. And in really early stage startup, there probably shouldn't be a growth product manager. The growth product manager will only help how do I say this? Will help grow an already successful product. So if there's no product market fit, there's nothing for a growth product manager to work on. All efforts will be lost. So that's I'd be cautious yeah. Anyways, I hope that makes sense. One moment. Holy cow, questions are coming faster than I get to them. How can growth manager lead and growth product manager be used interchangeably? Yeah, yeah, they can be used interchangeably. That's just the title. I think don't look at titles, look at the responsibilities. I don't think that there's a difference between necessarily a growth manager, a growth lead versus a growth product manager. They're often quite similar. Somebody asked, how is competitive differentiation strategy visited at Mozilla? How is it decided when not to pursue what competitors are doing? Well, I think in this case, like Mozilla has very strong values around privacy, security, and protecting the open web. So in the case of, think of Firefox versus Chrome, or Mozilla versus Google, Google's business model is all about collecting data on users and driving people to their search engine to monetize them through advertising. Mozilla doesn't have that same business model, and we have a large focus on protecting users' privacy and making sure they're not being tracked around the web. Can a growth manager take upon himself or herself to roll out small features, optimizations, or leave it to traditional product managers? So there's no reason why a growth product manager couldn't do smaller features, but I think that if they're working on smaller features and not just optimization, it's because they truly believe that there's going to be impact on their pirate metrics. A growth product manager, that is their goal, is to drive growth. And if they're adding a preference, in the settings of a product, it will likely have little impact. But you could expect that. Let's take Dropbox Paper, their new product which kind of competes against a Google Doc. You could see how it's easy to see how the growth team might own the part of the product around collaboration, because while it's a core feature, the collaboration is automatically generating referral for the product. So perhaps the early stage of that product would have been worked on by the regular product manager, and the growth product manager took it over. But it's easy to see why a growth product manager would have been involved in it from the beginning, since while it's a core feature, collaboration, it's also probably their primary source of new users, knowing Dropbox. How to gain trust of data scientists? Do we need to know various algorithms, models, instead of having hands-on knowledge on tools like R and Python? So, well, you should always trust your data scientist or they shouldn't be with you. Now, I don't necessarily think you always need to know that. In this smaller startup, I think there's a lot of tools you could potentially use. Some that come to mind are Amplitude, Mixpanel. These can really help you get some product metrics quickly without having to write complicated queries or scripts. Those will be required, though, when your product is at much larger scale, because those tools won't necessarily have everything that you need. But yeah, I've spent the last 10 years diving into data, and to be honest, my R and Python is horrible, but my SQL skills are really strong. And ideally, I don't have to use SQL because it's far more time consuming than if I have a tool that can help me query data faster. And so, yeah, I hope that answers in terms of skill set. There are no more questions. Oh, wait, I take that back. So since growth managers attract a lot of small victories vis-a-vis traditional PMs who need to be more patient for a big victory, what would be my advice for traditional PMs to take this in their stride? I'm not quite sure I understand, but I'll interpret it. Well, first, I hope that growth managers are not just going for small victories, and that's where really the RICE score comes into play, because you're prioritizing based off of the reach, the impact, your confidence, and ease of building something. So small wins. So often we talk about optimizing the color of a button. That has very little impact. Often you have to go big in order to have a tremendous impact. And an example would be if you optimize the layout and the colors of a landing page over and over again, you're getting very small incremental changes. But if you redesign the whole thing and you start from scratch, you have more opportunity or more likelihood of achieving a large impact, whether that be for good or for bad. So in terms of a traditional product manager, I think it's important that they still formulate hypotheses and success metrics before releasing something, and that once it's released, they look at the performance of what they've shipped and make sure that it's behaving as expected. And there's no reason why a traditional product manager couldn't make a couple of iterations on the product that they shipped, rather than just walking away from it and letting the growth PM take it over. If it's not behaving as expected, it's not moving the metrics that you thought it would, you should go back to the drawing board and make some improvements to it immediately. So somebody wrote ICE score is the one without reach. Yeah, so just the ICE score, and it's used in like tools like North Star from Growth Hackers, and I think like in the impact they include reach. It depends whether or not you want to give reach and impact separate scores. See what fits for you and adjust. Any good tools for automated testing? I'm a bad engineer, so I'm not going to recommend anything at this time. But definitely you should include automated testing to make sure you can do fast deployments. It will certainly replace a large part of your manual QA. And if you want to do rapid iteration and ship quickly, automated testing should be part of that. Any resources you'd like to share which will help us build our PM skills? So from a growth side, I think it's always like, there are three very influential people who have impacted my career, and I've had the pleasure of meeting them a few times. There's Brian Balfour, Andrew Chen, and Sean Ellis. Anything that they've written, the blogs they've written, and I think even Brian Balfour has the Reforge School, which focuses a lot on growth. And those are their content is not only worth reading, but that school I would recommend, if you have the opportunity to attend, to try to. For more traditional product management, I guess I'll share what I've more recently appreciated, not just recently. So recently I've enjoyed the book, for example, Play to Win, which reminded me of things I learned years ago at school about business strategy and product strategy. But Play to Win puts it in a very presentable and consumable format, and makes it really easy to communicate and share with engineers and leadership. Years ago, maybe five years ago, Lean Startup was the book to read in Silicon Valley. I still think it's relevant today, and product managers who are thinking about or wondering how they can iteratively ship things should really give that book a read. So somebody got Andrew Chen, Sean Ellis, and the third person was Brian Balfour. Brian Balfour was the VP of Growth at HubSpot. Well, I cannot say whether or not this is good or not, but I just ordered this book yesterday, and this will be my next read. I've gone from completely hating product roadmaps to seeing how I can adapt them more and keep them flexible to communicate product strategy with others. So I cannot say whether this is going to be good or not, but if you would like to see what I'm reading now, this is what I'll be reading in the next couple of days. So do growth PMs need to know digital marketing, running campaigns by themselves? What other skills you believe should be an ideal growth PM should have? So I think first of all, growth PM, really what's important is a mindset. You're okay with failure because you know you're gonna learn a lot. Now, clearly, obviously, you're not paid to fail. That's where having confidence in your ideas and validating things will be important. But not everyone is comfortable with building things and potentially throwing them right out after. Do they need digital marketing skills? I think it is very valuable to have digital marketing skills. Not everyone will necessarily have that background. Some people in growth will focus more on the acquisition side and therefore will need that skill set, while others might work more on referral and retention and then might not need it as much. But I think there is a certain due diligence that is needed to understand what is happening, to also be aware of what the digital marketing team might be working on, so that there's a better collaboration between the two. You don't want them to just send you users and then that they walk away and hope that you're going to be able to activate them and retain them. There should be a really close alignment, and I think as a product manager, you should understand the digital marketing side, and they should have ideally a good understanding of what your activation and retention flows will look like. Yes, so is there a difference between, so one moment, wow, okay, so I did miss quite a few questions. And so there was one of the, what other skills should a growth PM have? And so growth PM should be somewhat technical, because you want to, marketers who are not technical will limit the scope of the ideas they have for achieving growth. You should be very analytical. If you're not analytical, if you're not comfortable with data and writing queries, then you're going to struggle. And in small companies, you rarely have the opportunity of having an analyst. So the growth lead, growth product manager will often play the role of analyst. And you tend to have, like, depending on the size of your team, you might have to do more. Potentially, you might have to do some front-end development, but it will always depend on the composition of your team. Now, and this kind of leads me to a question that I see here. Is there a difference between a growth PM and a growth hacker? So I kind of am becoming allergic to the term growth hacker because it's like this all mythical person who can do everything. Well, I think that they can. I think that a growth hacker can be many different people. There are growth engineers, and so who are, for example, really good at implementing stacks and rapidly building prototypes of ideas for experiments. All the different metric tools and A/B testing tools you want to implement require an engineer who's comfortable with those. You're going to have there are designers who are better for growth than others, and you know, a growth hacker, I don't think, as it was described early on, it was somebody who had marketing, engineering, analytics, design skills. Like in today's day and age, if you will, I think it's really hard to find somebody with all those skills. And so I think that, and I still see today job offers for a growth hacker, and it should really not be a one-man show. It should be a small team. And I think that requires, depending on the skill sets, at least 2 to 3 people. 2 people is only doable if each is very T-shaped and has multiple skills. But yeah, that's why I guess I'm not fond of the term growth hacker, because it's like a unicorn that can do everything, and that's not really, they're not very common. Somebody asked, can you repeat the quote you mentioned earlier? If there is no product market fit, there is nothing to do for a growth manager. Yeah, correct. So if there's, I guess the most blunt way I can say this is, if your product is garbage and no one's interested in it, you're not going to grow it. It's as simple as that. So if there is truly, you truly have a product that you've built that has product market fit, people have interest, then you actually have something to grow. So that's why I think that in the early stages of a startup, the role of, there shouldn't be much focus on hiring a growth manager, a growth product manager, because you first need to validate that you actually have a product that people care about and that you're resolving a problem that people actually have. And then once you've validated that you are resolving a problem for people, and that people want to use it, then you can consider, how do we grow this quicker? Are introverts more suited for traditional PM and extroverts more suited for a growth PM? Have you ever seen a trend? Is there any? No, I don't think there's any connection whatsoever. So in both cases, product managers often have to communicate and be the face of the team, the champions of their products or what they're working on. So a regular product manager has to, has to be the face of that product within the company. It has to be communicating and everything. So an introvert can still do that. An extrovert might be more comfortable doing it, but I don't think that there's really any personality type that is preferable for the job. Thank you, by the way. These have all been really great questions.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for joining us today. And the session was very useful. And I hope everyone of you have enjoyed the session. And thank you everyone for joining us. And I hope you all are aware of our upcoming sessions. If not, I am sharing the link of our website in the chat section. You can visit our website and check out our upcoming events, and you can also register from here. And once again, thanks a lot for joining. And in case you have any queries, you can reach out to me. And yes, you can reach out to Alex as well in case you have any queries related to product management.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And don't be shy to reach out if you have questions. You can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. So thank you very much.